The sun was just beginning to settle behind the Tetons that late summer afternoon when Elias Caldwell stepped off his horse in front of the little cabin he had built with his own hands. 42 years earlier, Martha, his wife of 37 years, that had gone to her reward the winter before, and the place felt quieter than any man ought to bear. He loosened the cinch on old Buck, let the reins drop, and started toward the porch with the slow, steady gait of a man who had earned every ache in his knees. That was when he saw her. A young woman, no more than 25, sat slumped against the cabin door, her cotton dress torn and stained, her left leg laid open from knee to ankle with a long, angry cut that wept bright red onto the pine boards. Her face was pale as fresh cream, her eyes half closed like she was listening to music only she could hear. Elias stopped still, took a slow breath, and felt something shift inside his chest, the way it does when you remember you are still alive and still needed. He knelt, careful not to startle her the way he would gentle a frightened colt's. "Now, darling," he said, soft as Sunday morning, "I'm Elias, and this is my place. You're safe here." She tried to pull away, but there was no strength left in her. Monthly trouble showed up again, she whispered, voice trembling like aspen leaves, "and I started bleeding something fierce. I was riding to town for the doctor, but the horse threw me and crawled the last mile. I think." Elias looked at the blood pooling beneath her leg and knew this was no ordinary monthly trouble. A piece of him wanted to ride for the doctor himself, but the nearest town was 18 miles over rough country and the light was failing fast. He looked at her face again, saw the fear hiding behind the pain, and made up his mind the way a man does when there is no other decent choice. "I'm going to take care of you," he said. "I've birthed calves and stitched up more cowboys than I can count, and my Martha, rest her soul, taught me how to be gentle when gentle is what's called for. You just breathe slow and let me do the worrying." He slipped one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her knees, and lifted her as easy as if she was a child. She weighed next to nothing, and her head fell against his chest like she had known him all her life. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of cedar and coffee and the faint sweetness of the lavender sachets Martha used to tuck into the linen. He laid the girl on the quilt that still carried his wife's scent and lit the kerosene lamp so the room glowed soft and gold. Her name was Ruth, she told him between shallow breaths. Ruth Ann Miller, from over near Jackson. She had no husband, no mother nearby, only a little rented room and a job waiting tables at the Antler Inn. When the bleeding started that morning, she thought she could make it to the doctor on her own pride, he thought, and the fierce kind of loneliness that makes young folks believe they have to carry everything alone. Elias filled a basin with water warmed on the stove, fetched the needle and catgut he kept for fencing accidents, and the bottle of whiskey he saved for Christmas and toothaches. He washed his hands the way Martha always insisted, slow and thorough, singing low under his breath an old hymn she loved. Ruth watched him with wide eyes, trusting now because there was nothing else left to do. "This is going to sting some," he said, "but then it'll easy." Poured a little whiskey over the wound and a little more into a tin cup for her. "Drink if you can, it'll quiet the shaking." She sipped, coughed, smiled a watery smile, and said, "You sound like my grandpa when he patched me up after I fell out of the hayloft." Elias smiled back, feeling the years fold gentle round him. "Grandpas know a thing or two," he said. He cleaned the gash, gentle as handling a newborn lamp. The cut was deep but clean, no dirt ground and no broken bone, praising the Lord for small mercies with hands that had roped steers and cradled babies. He threaded the needle and began to stitch one small neat stitch at a time, talking all the while the way you do to keep fear from crowding the room. "When I was your age, I thought I had to be tough every minute," Elias said. "Thought asking for help was weakness. Then I married Martha, and she taught me that real strength is letting somebody hold you up the sky with you when it gets too heavy." She was little like you, but she could carry more love than 10 big men. Ruth's eyes filled and the tears slid into her. "I lost one last year," she whispered, "a baby 8 weeks along. He never told a soul, just bled and cried alone in my room today. When it started again, I thought God was punishing me." Elias tied off the last stitch, cut the thread, and laid his rough hand over her small, cold one. "Listen to me now," he said, slow and sure. "God doesn't punish with blood and sorrow. He made women strong enough to bring life into this hard world, and sometimes that strength comes with a price, but it is not punishment. It is the mark of how much you are trusted to carry." He fetched clean flannel from the trunk at the foot of the bed, the one Martha had pieced from Elias's old shirts, soft as butter now from years of washing. He tore strips for bandages, warmed a brick, wrapped it in toweling, and tucked it against her belly. Then he made her drink strong coffee laced with condensed milk and a spoon of honey, the way his mother did when he was small and fevered. Night settled purple over the mountains, and the cabin filled with the quiet sounds of the creak of the rocker where Elias sat watching over her, the tick of the old mantel clock, a soft sigh of wind in the pines. Ruth slept at last, her breathing evening out, face smoothing like a child's. Elias pulled the quilt higher, covered her feet with an extra blanket, and allowed himself one silent tear for the baby she would never hold, and for the baby Martha had lost long ago, that they never spoke of after the first raw week. Sometime past midnight, she woke needing the chamber pot. He helped her modest as any father, turning his back while she managed. When she was settled again, she caught his sleeve. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "why are you doing all this for a stranger?" He thought a minute, rocking slow. "Because once I was bleeding on the inside and somebody stopped for me," he said. "Because your life matters even when you feel like it doesn't. Bet my Martha would rise up and tan my hide if I left you on the porch, but Mostly because kindness is the only thing we get to keep when everything else is gone. She started to cry, then the deep, quiet kind that heals more than it hurts. He let her cry, held her hand and hummed the hymn again until the storm past morning came pale and sweet. Elias cooked oatmeal with raisins and brown sugar the way his children liked it when they were small. Ruth sat propped with pillows sipping coffee, watching him with wondering eyes. You move like a man who's loved hard and been loved back, she said. He chuckled. Soft 6 years on this earth, and that's the finest compliment I've ever had. Over the next days she grew stronger, changed the dressing morning and night, kept the fire going, brought her wildflowers in a mason jar. They talked about everything and nothing about the war he never fought in but carried anyway, about the daughter in Denver who sent postcards but never visited, rarely about the way grief sits in your bones long after the tears dry, about how Ruth wanted to be a schoolteacher someday but didn't know if she was smart enough. You're smart enough, Elias told her. Smart is mostly showing up and trying again tomorrow. One evening the pain had eased enough for her to sit on the porch. The sun was setting fire behind the mountains and the air smelled of warm pine and coming rain. Ruth sat wrapped in Martha's old shawl, her bandaged legs stretched out on a stool. Elias brought out 2 mugs of sassafras tea and settled beside Harry. Used to think life was about holding on, she said, holding on to people, to dreams, to the idea of how things were supposed to be. But maybe it's about letting go, gentle when the time comes, and trusting there'll be hands waiting to catch you. Elias nodded. Slow. That's the secret they don't tell young folks. Love isn't owning, it's opening your hands and letting it stay because it wants to, not because it has to. A week later the doctor from town came by, pronounced the leg healing clean and the bleeding stopped for good. This time Ruth could ride again. She packed her few things, hugged Elias so tight he felt his old ribs creak. You'll never forget you, she said. You gave me back my life. He walked her to the corral, helped her mount the gentle mare he kept for visitors. You gave me back mine too, he said. Remind me it still matters what an old man does with his days. She rode away, slowed down the valley road, turning once to wave. Elias stood there long after she was gone, hand raised, feeling Martha smiling somewhere just out of sight. Years later folks in Jackson would talk about Miss Miller, the schoolteacher who always had extra lunch for the child, whose daddy drank, and an open door for any girl who found herself in trouble. They said she learned kindness from an old rancher who once stitched up her leg and her heart on the same quiet night. And out on the ranch Elias kept the porch swept and the lamp burning just in case another weary traveler needed to remember that even when the body fails, the soul can still be carried gentle in someone else's hands, because kindness, he knew, is the longest memory we leave behind. And love well given never truly leaves the neighborhood of the heart. He lived on gentle into his 80s, rocking on that same porch, watching the Tetons turn rose and gold, and every time the wind carried the scent of lavender or the sound of a woman's soft laugh, he smiled slow and easy, knowing the circle was still turning, knowing he had done the unthinkable. He had opened his door, his hands, his heart, and in doing so had defied every lonely fate the years tried to hand him.